Okay, welcome back to PsychoBible. It's me, Andrew Rodriguez, babbling about psychology and theology. And I've been doing a series of videos just reflecting back on this year, 2018, and some of the key experiences I had this year. And as I've been doing that, I've been thinking about how 2018 has been a year of coming full circle. And even if you think about eight, all right, I don't know if any significance of the number 2018, but the number eight is significant because that symbolizes renewal or a return. Um, if you think about it as well, the eight, the numeral looks like the infinity symbol, and so it's the idea of a return back. So I've had some really key experiences this year that were a return back to some prior events. And so the one I would like to talk about today would be my experience with the Restored Hope Network. So, for those of you who don't know, the Restored Hope Network, or RHN for short, is an umbrella ministry or organization for multiple other ministries and ministers and counselors who specialize in helping people with unwanted same-sex attraction. It formed, I want to say 2011, 2012. About a year and a half prior to the collapse of Exodus International, which was a well-known umbrella organization for ministries in this area. Exodus had closed down in 2013. Now, one misconception everyone has is that meant that there's no more of these, what people tend to call ex-gay ministries, or ministries for people dealing with unwanted same-sex attraction. But no, that's not true. It's just Exodus, this umbrella organization that helped keep them all connected and organized in different ways, that shut down. I'm not going to go into detail of all of that, but we'll say I was in graduate school at that point, kind of early on in grad school, because I started my grad school work in 2012. And when I was in graduate school, I would get into conversations with people about what they call conversion therapy or reparative therapy, or just other terms out there for counseling for people with unwanted same-sex attraction to help them explore any potential heterosexual possibilities, or to help them simply resisting homosexual behavior in relationships and living chastely or living according to their biblical, sincerely held convictions. And that's a field I had been working in for years, because when I was an undergraduate, as a student at Valley Forge Christian College, I had the opportunity to do my undergraduate internship, just as in my bachelor's, at a ministry in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, called Day 7 Ministries, which at the time was a member ministry of Exodus International. Now, they didn't deal only with homosexuality or same-sex attraction. They dealt with any issue that was sexual in nature, whether it was sexual abuse or sexual addiction or homosexuality. And so I did that internship in 2006. And I was very fortunate to be able to do an internship like that, because it involved little more than just doing clerical work like most other bachelor's internships. I was able to participate in some of the recovery groups, and really just I was supposed to observe, but I became sort of part of the recovery group in a way, and I got to join in the discussions and really get to walk with some of these guys the entire summer. It wasn't just for the set period of time you do an internship, but I really jumped in and got to do a couple of intake interviews, or partner with someone else to do them. And it was a very formative experience for me. So I got my start literally in doing this type of work through Exodus International, or at least a member ministry. And as a counselor, or as a lay counselor, or even at my job, if I had someone on the phone who was looking for help in this area and we didn't have any therapists who offered this, I might have recommended them to check out Exodus's website because they would have a referral page to help them find other counselors who deal with this issue. So it was a resource to me, and also um, it was a beacon of hope for me as well when I was in graduate school and in a uh, very liberal or very left-wing environment that was against any type of help for people with unwanted same-sex attraction. They just simply had the gay affirmative or pro-gay stance. The idea that everyone's born that way, or that no matter. I had one professor who she eventually was willing to admit that there may be. She tried to justify it this way: oh, there's two types of homosexuals: ones who are born that way, and those who are made that way through trauma or experiences. And so she would concede that point, but still they were all opposed to the idea of helping people work through that stuff. And it's like, well, what's the point of even being a counselor if you don't believe people can possibly change or work through any of the root issues of their problems? Especially, I was going to a school that uh, shared a uh, psychodynamic approach to counseling, which is all about going back to root issues and help people work through those things. And they understand, and going through that with the understanding they may not be totally free of these issues. That's the whole one of the core concepts of psychodynamic or psychoanalytic therapies. Like, people may never really fully change, but it doesn't mean you just stop trying to help them. So they check their brain at the door when it comes to this issue. They so totally are divorced from their own therapeutic model when it comes to homosexuality, and they would just say, no, no, not this issue. Everything else we can help people with, but not this one. This is one where they're just born that way or they're made that way by experiences, but no, we're not going to help them. We're going to help them by encouraging them to embrace it. So this is the stupid mentality in the psych world these days, even in a psychodynamically oriented uh, institute. Now, of course, this school, which is supposedly Chestnut Hill College, which is where I was a graduate student at, is a they describe themselves as an inclusive Catholic university, which inclusive simply means every other viewpoint except for a conservative or traditional viewpoint. So, I didn't really know going into it how liberal they were. I'm not sure if I would have changed my mind because it was a very formative experience for me. So I don't want to go into this too in depth because I'm probably going to do a series of videos, or I'm definitely going to do a series of videos just about my graduate school experience. So anyway, in graduate school, getting into conversations in classes about this type of work and about my experiences with the one member ministry of Exodus, as well as what I then did after my internship when I was an undergraduate, was I began a support group on campus at my college for guys dealing with unwanted same-sex attraction, as well as guys with heterosexual pornography and sexual addiction issues, and guys dealing with trauma issues. So it was very broad, but God just kept bringing it so that it was half the guys dealing with SSA and the other half just dealing with other heterosexual issues. And between the two of those types of groups, but usually about half were dealing with some major trauma issues in their past. So I was doing this type of work for years before I even began my graduate school experience. So when the discussion would come up about this stuff, I'd be the one who'd raise my hand, like, well, actually, I know a little bit about this. I know people in this field. I've read their books. I got to do a training with Cy Rogers, who was one of the early leaders of Exodus, and got to meet him and his wife, and went out to breakfast with them because my pastor has a connection with them. They used to go to the same church in Florida. So that was an experience I had right when I began graduate school. That was in 2012, where I got to meet them. But I had been just been involved in this field for so long. So I was like, what am I going to do? Lie about this? That this is where I come from? No, I'm going to take the chance and be honest and upfront going into graduate school about this. Because I knew that going into graduate school and being open about my experience and my views on homosexuality and same-sex attraction and the right to have therapy for this, for people who want it, therapy equality. I knew these would be controversial, and every time I would open my mouth, I might be risking academic suicide. And so I figured, well, I'm either going to be a coward the whole time in graduate school, or I'm going to be open about it from the get-go. And so I was, from even my admissions interview, and uh, I documented where I did my internship in undergraduate, so they could easily look it up. And even after Exodus closed down, it took them a while to update their website to show that they were no longer a member of Ministry of Exodus. So I knew what I was going into, and I faced a lot of opposition, but also had some really good conversations out of it all. But I definitely needed some support. And going on Facebook and seeing posts by Exodus just helped encourage me. But then you start to see something happening over the last couple of years of Exodus. Is there was some controversy developing where Alan Chambers, the final president of Exodus, and it was a really small board. At this point, he had pretty much unilateral power, him and Randy Thomas, his vice president. And he declared that they were going to remove all ministries within Exodus that did reparative therapy, which reparative therapy is simply it's a therapeutic model that is pretty much an integration of trauma-based therapy and psychoanalysis or psychodynamic therapy that seeks, based on the developmental model of how same-sex attraction develops. So it helps people explore the root issues and resolve those issues to, as a byproduct, bring about a decrease in same-sex attraction and potential initiation or increase in heterosexual attraction. So in a nutshell, that's what reparative therapy is. And true reparative therapy. There's a lot of people who say they do reparative therapy, or people be accused of doing reparative therapy, and what they're referring to is not reparative therapy. So, but either way, Alan Chambers at the time said, "Nope, I don't believe anyone can change." Here he is as the president of Exodus saying that 99.9% of people that he knows who've come out of homosexuality haven't changed in their attractions at all, and that was just ridiculous. Um, just ignoring the data when there's people in the ministries he's representing who have experienced change in attractions, and ministry leaders he could have went to a whole bunch of them. So there's this controversy developing, and so some of the member ministries noticed the tide changing, and so they formed Restored Hope Network. So they formed it about a year and a half before Alan Chambers just finally just said, "I'm closing down Exodus." He basically had a whole change in theology and philosophy and worldview, and just pretty much betrayed the whole organization. And so that's why he closed it down in 2013. It wasn't because Exodus had failed in any way. He had failed Exodus. So a bunch of the member ministries saw where things were going, and so they pulled out and they formed Restored Hope Network. It was Ann Paulk, as well as Stephen Black and Andrew Comiskey, and who else might have been one of the early? Denise Schick as well, some of the early board members. And then they love how they proceeded. They made sure that they were much more stringent in who they accepted as member ministries or member counselors. Because one problem I would say Exodus had was they might have been a little too open to who they would accept, and May didn't have high enough standards at times. So there were some weird stories I heard that had been at certain Exodus ministries throughout the years. So there is some valid criticism against Exodus and some of the practices that went on there. But Restored Hope Network has had a very clean record since they've developed or they formed. So I was really discouraged when I heard about Exodus collapsing, and I needed something to help give me encouragement when I was in graduate school. And it was until after Exodus collapsed I heard about Restored Hope Network, even though they had formed a couple of years prior. So I started following them on Facebook and reading the posts from there and hearing about their conferences. And most of the conferences, I think, at that time were all out west. But in 2015, their conference was going to be in Lancaster, PA, which is my old hometown. And I was like, are you kidding me? I've been following these guys for a couple years now, and I might have the opportunity to finally go to one of their conferences. I mean, I was a poor graduate school student. I wasn't going to travel very far to go to one of their other conferences, not at that point. And so I was like, yeah, definitely, I'm going to do this. So I was scheduled. It was going to be June, I want to say 24th. I think so. 2015. I was just eagerly looking forward to that like all year. I must have scheduled got my ticket and registered, and I was gonna have one of the guys from my recovery group join me as well, and um, I was looking forward to it. Now, this is the interesting thing because this is 2015. The day before that conference, I got an email from Dr. Nicholas Wood at Chestnut Hill College. He was at the time, I don't know what his position is now, the head of the internship program. And he got an email, or he sent an email to me telling me to stop my internship immediately because he read in my bio, and here's pretty much word for word what my bio said, that I have experience in helping men who are coping with unwanted same-sex attractions and leaving homosexual lifestyles. So his alarms went off, which is interesting because I mentioned this in a couple other videos. I was in his class prior to my internship. It was a group therapy class, and I mentioned my group then that I was running, and the the type of clients I was working with, and the perspective I was coming from. It's even in one of my papers. So I'll go into that more in depth. So I got this email right before this conference. What beautiful timing it was. I couldn't think of a better place to be after getting this devastating email telling me that I need to schedule a meeting with them. Basically, I would be going into some sort of inquisition, and that eventually led to me getting kicked out of my graduate school. And going into that, I couldn't think of a better place to be. Also, during that same conference, 2015, that was it Friday? I believe it was Friday or Saturday. I'm not sure. It was um, either way. One of those days is when Supreme Court made their decision to um, legalize, as if they can make these decisions or pass laws, but to rule against Defense of Marriage Act laws that were being passed, and thus legalizing same-sex marriage nationwide. What better place to be? There couldn't be no better place than right there with Ministries, who are working with people in this field, fellow strugglers, guys who are clients, and just it was such an encouraging environment to be. And there I was, the first day at this conference, and I'm sitting next to Peter and I think Kristen Sprague from the Family Research Council. I didn't know them. I just happened to end up sitting next to them. And uh, during a couple of the breaks, I showed her here on my phone. Here's this email I just got yesterday, and I just need prayer. I need some advice from some of the ministries. And so she prayed with me and encouraged me. I got to meet. I was starstruck. Here I got to meet some of the people that I've been following online, or I read their books. One of the big deals was I got to meet Andrew Comiskey, who wrote Pursuing Sexual Wholeness. This was the second book I had ever read on homosexuality when I was in undergrad, and I was doing research on homosexuality and counseling for it. Andrew Comiskey. Let's see. There you go. It's one of his older pictures. And I got to meet him. I got to go to he was one of the keynote speakers, and got to go to one of his workshops and interact with him there and share with him the email I just had, and get some prayer. He prayed with me and gave me some encouragement. It was so uplifting. there was some other things, really cool things that happened. I got to meet one of the guys who was in one of the recovery groups at day 7 from 2006. So it was so uplifting. That was 2015. The next year's conference, 2016, they were in Chicago. I couldn't afford to go out there. The year 2017, they were in San Diego. So I just wasn't able to go to the conferences. Um, Especially, I had to make sort of a judgment call because after that, after the 2015 Restored Hope Network conference, I started going to the Alliance for Therapeutic Choice and Scientific Integrity conferences. It used to be called NARTH. So I'm going to do a separate video about that because it was through Restored Hope Network that I got connected with NARTH because there's some crossover. So just the story just gets so encouraging the more I think about it. So I was going to the Alliance conferences instead. I had to make a call. I'm not sure which ones I can afford to go to. So, but this year, 2018, Restored Hope Network back on the East Coast. This time outside Washington D.C. at First Baptist in Glenarden, Maryland. And I was like, all right, I can make that trip. I'm gonna. That was a long drive. I had clients that I had a hotel, and so the night before the conference began, I I drove from my clients. That was a long day, so I drove from my client after my last client. So it was like 8 p.m. I'm leaving to drive all the way, and I was dead tired. I was struggling to stay awake because it was like I don't know, like a 4 hour drive, 3 4 hour drive going through Washington D.C. or close to that area. Um, so I got to go to another Restored Hope Network conference, and so now we are back full circle, like I was saying, and it was so encouraging. And there's so many other things that have been going on this year as well that this tied into. At my church, we are planning a ministry to girls uh, as an outreach to help girls with issues like self-esteem and bullying, and it's sort of inspired by another program that our pastor became aware of because of some friends he has that were involved in this program in the Orlando, Florida area called the Lovely Project. So he had went down and visited their program. What they do is like a 1 day event, and then they follow up with a discipleship program. Um, and it's gotten so big that even the schools in the area invited them to start doing their program. So we're going to do our own version of that at my church, and I'm part of the planning committee for that. And our focus is going to be on identity, understanding your identity as girls. And so I've it's kind of interesting. My focus of study for years has been understanding identity as a male, as a man. But over the past year or so, I've been doing a lot of pondering and delving in a little bit here and there about, okay, I know the idea of masculinity. And even from a biblical point of view, the different words used for male and man and the significance there, I haven't really jumped in too much with femininity and what it means to be a female. So I wanted to just explore that a bit more over the past year. And so I've been exploring that more. And then this idea of starting up this ministry came up. And so I'm like, okay, God's doing something here. So I've been diving in even more. And I discovered this church in Greenville, South Carolina, that they have a ministry called Azair, where they it's their women's ministry, and they help them understand biblical femininity. Femininity, that's a tongue twister. And so I found their resources and their books, and I've been reading them and reading or watching all their and listening to their podcasts and their training videos, and just I've been learning so much about what it means to be a woman. And this whole idea of gender, I've just um, once again, things going full circle. When I was a student in college, so undergrad, I was part of an honors course called Debates in Science and Religion. And we had a guest speaker one time. It was a student who had done an internship with the Templeton Foundation. And so it's like a big think tank that discusses issues of science and religion. And so we were just sort of picking his brain, asking him how his internship was and what things they studied. And one question came up about homosexuality. And he gave a bit of a cop-out answer, but at the same time it was true. He just didn't go beyond it. So he actually, to me, he hadn't really explored this too well, but he brought up a good point. He said, I think before we can really answer the question of homosexuality, we need to understand gender. And that was all he said. But it stuck with me. And I believed, you know what, that's true. A bit of a cop-out because that's where he left it, when there's a whole lot more that could be said. But it stuck with me, and things have come around full circle where now, after so many years of working with guys with sexual addiction issues and homosexuality and learning a lot about those, but now God's been calling me to go deeper into what is the core? What is the core issue here? And that is understanding gender, which I can't believe I forgot to mention this. 2015, at the Restored Hope Network conference 3 years ago, was my exposure to Christopher West and the theology of the body. And you can see in my playlist Theology of the Body, and the one keynote address he gave at the Restored Hope Network Conference 2015, it was the first keynote address that conference, and it just set the tone for the rest of the conference, and it just blew my mind. All these things I had been teaching about and trying to explain to guys in my group I run about what it means to be a man and masculinity and the image of God and how it all ties together, he gave me words for it that I didn't know I needed, and just put all these puzzle pieces together when it comes to theology of the body. And it's a teaching based off of the teachings of Pope John Paul II, but is not a Catholic teaching. It's just good Trinitarian teachings based off the Trinity. And the more I've been studying theology of the body, the more I am convinced that is the key. The true biblical understanding of our reflection of the image of God as male and female is the key for overcoming the current sexual identity crisis we're experiencing in society. And not just that, not just sexual issues, but even the conflict between right and left, between feminism and the men's rights movements, or the misogynies of the world, the different versions. And I just, I've been on this road of figuring this out, and 2019 is going to be a year of me really digging into this. I've just been buying books like crazy on masculinity and femininity and gender, and that is going to be my topic. I've got so many books I've been getting like crazy, and I'm going to study like mad. So, all that said, this year at the conference, 2018, were a bunch of keynote addresses and workshop sessions about gender and about theology of the body. And I've been seeing more and more, ever since that 2015 conference, more and more of the ministries at Restored Hope Network are using theology of the body as their foundation now. They're realizing, okay, this is important stuff. We need a theological foundation for the work we're doing, and this fits that. This fits the bill. So that's been exciting to see. But I went to, let me see here. There was a workshop. First one I went to at the 2018 conference was by Wendy Terry on gender, confusion, and life giving. And just a great workshop right there about working with transgender students. She works mostly with adolescents, but before going to her work with transgender students was just, what is gender? And she just did a great job explaining that. Then I got to meet Julie Roys, and let me see here. She wrote Redeeming the Feminine Soul, and so I got to meet her and go to one of her sessions, and she was a keynote speaker. and got her book signed, and just told a little bit about the work I've been doing, and trying to uh, really develop in my own church an understanding for the feminine and uh, the the calling of the feminine. Um, so that was powerful. So let me show some photos as well of some of the people I met. Um, this is one thing that just blows my mind. So, 2015 conference. One of the videos I picked up was "Such Were Some of You." This was made by Pure Passion Media, and it's an excellent resource DVD about just homosexuality in general, and includes different theologians like Dr. Michael Brown and Robert Gagnon, as well as just the stories of a bunch of people in this field. And a lot of them are ones you'll meet if you go to the Restored Hope Network conferences. I've shown this video to people at my church, and they watch it, and I'm like, yeah, I know a bunch of these people, and they're real, and you can meet them. And so, and it blows my mind because these guys are like, I read their books, I read their blogs, I watch their videos, I see their posts online, and they're like, for me, these are rock stars, the people in this field doing this work, and who've been pioneers in this field. So this was another year of me getting to meet more of my heroes in this field. So let me show some photos. All right, so here's me getting to the conference day one, and it was at that First Baptist Church of Glenarden, and this church was humongous. I was just in awe of the architecture, so I got a few photos just of the building. I just that steeple that was so gorgeous looking. Yeah, beautiful. So many photos. I'm an artist, so I really love design and architecture, and just fascinated the heck out of me. So different people giving their testimonies. This church in Glenarden is the home for one of the ministries of Restored Hope Network. It's Deborah Barr's ministry, All Things New, I believe. Yes, All Things New. That's her ministry right there at that church. And so a lot of the people giving their testimonies, I believe, were clients of hers. And just fascinating. This is Deborah Barr. She was from All Things New, and so she was one of the keynote speakers. This is Dee Barnes. She's also one of the board members. She's one of the newer ones. Her and Deborah Barr are new board members, I believe. Just great story. Her own testimony, but also she was giving a message about the power of testimony. So, excellent speakers. And another testimony right here. Another testimony. Another testimony. Another photo of that church. So like I said, meeting some of my heroes. All right, so this is Joe Dallas, and when I saw him, he ended up sitting a few pews in front of me. The first session, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's Joe Dallas, and his wife Renee was with him as well, and I was just like, are you kidding me? He's here, and because he wasn't at the first conference I was at, and he's a former president of Exodus International, one of the early leaders. And I read his book. He's got a few really good books. His most popular would be Desires in Conflict, which I actually haven't read yet, that one yet. But I read A Strong Delusion, and he does an excellent job. He'll say himself he was a former like uh, gay rights activist before he really met God, and really God transformed his life and went through therapy and really experienced significant change and just become one of the leaders in this field. And I love how he does a really good job explaining the gay rights activist movement and the motivating factors and their history of discrimination that they've experienced, and to help give a more compassionate approach to them. So he's just very balanced in everything he does. So I follow his blog and his Facebook page. He posts some really good articles. So when I saw him, I was just like, oh my gosh, that's Joe Dallas. I got to meet him. And I did. And fortunately, he was there with some other members of the Assemblies of God. I didn't know he was an AG member. So they were talking about how one of their new ministries within the AG that they've started is Restory, where they have a ministry to help equip the Assemblies of God with training on dealing with this issue of homosexuality. And so they were going to have a dinner, all the AG counselors and ministry members, that first night. And I'm not an AG member, but I'm a counselor at an AG school. So like, yeah, I'm a counselor at an AG school. Can I join you guys? Yep. So I took that opportunity. I got my photo with him later. That was an honor. I was starstruck. Let's see. This is Julie Roy's. So I purchased her book, like I said, Redeeming the Feminine Soul. Pick this book up. All right. I cannot recommend this book enough. After the conference, I came home. I literally read this book in one day. I just could not put it down. She shares her story in there of her experiences in ministry, of just being left out because she's a woman, and the discrimination for against women in ministry, and sort of flirting with feminism, and yet at the same time struggling between the egalitarian approach to women and their role in the church and the complementarian traditional viewpoints, and really struggling with reconciling the two and seeing what the biblical point of view is. And then she discovered theology of the body, and that just put all the pieces together for her. So that's essentially the book, and she makes a case at the conference in her keynote address and one of her sessions, as well as in the book, how current feminism is a form of misogyny. And when she said that, I'm like, yes, that's what I've been actually saying to people. Because what we're doing is you're seeing, and people are catching on to this, I see on YouTube, that what feminism is doing is trying to make women more like men, more masculine. Um, they're not emphasizing the beautiful traits that women have. And so we're actually seeing degrading of the feminine in feminism. And that to her is a form of misogyny. Now, she's totally against the other forms of male misogyny, but we need to realize that there's been a way overcorrection in feminism with the different waves. Each one has just gotten progressively worse and has been just degrading the feminine. So I just got so much out of that book. It's really informed a lot of what I've been teaching as well in my church and in my helping to develop the curriculum for this women's ministry or girls ministry. So that was excellent meeting her. All right, there's two. The one in the middle, that is Michael Newman. He's has a ministry out in Houston, Texas, and he does a lot of ministry to Hispanics. Then at the far right, that is Carl Conley. He's a new board member, and I don't know Carl too much, but he happened to just he knows Michael, of course. But I met Michael at one of the other workshops. Let's see, so here's it was that first workshop I was at that I was telling you about, and afterwards I went to speak to the workshop speaker, and Michael was there with me, and he was asking a question, and I'm looking at him like he looks really familiar, and I'm like, I know where I know him from. Such were some of you. So after we're done talking to the workshop speaker, I'm like, were you in Such Were Some of You? And he's like, yeah, I was. And I'm like, I knew I recognized you somewhere. So we got to chatting, and I told him about my story, and he just really encouraged me. He's like, you know, just gave me props for sticking things out with my grad school experience. And just to get that word of encouragement, someone who's in this field, who just been one of the pioneers, that was encouraging. So we've continued a bit of a correspondence since then. Let's see. Stephen Black. So Michael Newman, he told me, oh, well, I tell my story, my own testimony in Stephen's new book. Freedom Realized. I'm like, oh, I didn't get that book yet. I'll have to pick that up. And also, I didn't have one of my own books by Joe Dallas. One book I do own by Joe Dallas is The Complete Christian Guide to Understanding Homosexuality, which he co-edited with Nancy Haish. So I did not have that book with me. I was kicking myself. So I was like, okay, I want to get some signatures. So I picked up Freedom Realized. This is Stephen Black's book that just came out this year. And so I got Michael Newman to sign the page that he wrote his story on, and Joe Dallas wrote the foreword to it, so I got him to sign that page. And then I got the chance to meet Stephen Black at one of his workshops. And Stephen Black, this was his last year as a board member of RHN. He's the director of First Stone Ministries in Oklahoma. He's been doing that for, I think, like 30 years. I don't know if he was director for 30 years, but he's been there a while. He wasn't the founder. He was not 30. But anyway, he's been there a while. But First Stone Ministries was one of the first member ministries of Exodus International. So it's got a long history. And once again, going back to what I was talking about earlier with the collapse of Exodus, when Alan Chambers made that claim that 99.9% of people he knows haven't changed, Stephen saw that as a challenge. In fact, Stephen was one of the heads of the committees of pastoral care. I forget exactly what his title was, but he was one of the ones who sounded the alarm when he saw the theology going bad within Exodus and Alan Chambers. And so he took some heat when he spoke up against what was happening. But took that as a bit of a challenge. You're going to say that no one has changed? And at First Stone, they kept really good records. Like a lot of records, all their clients over the years. So they did a survey. And they got all this data. So Freedom Realized is Stephen's own testimony, but in the back, there is the results to the First Stone Ministry effectiveness survey. And they had 1,200 intact client files. And 500 people engaged, and then in the end were invited to take the survey. They got 185 respondents to get all the results from their survey. So still pretty decent number. And the results are in. They had, I'm not going to go in depth with this because I wasn't prepared to go through, so I don't have all the stats figured out, but you could check out his book, and they have just the result alone. They create a separate booklet just for that. So you can get an electronic version, or you can get an actual print version. And it's reasonable price, so check it out. The First Stone Ministries Effectiveness Survey. The results are out there of the actual progress made. So, and this guy is a fireball. So I went to his workshop, met him afterwards, and got him to sign my book and took my photo with him. And so I'll share a little bit more about Stephen later as well. Some other speakers that were at the conference this year were Dr. Michael Brown. You may know him from he does a lot of debates. He's a Christian theologian, an apologist, Messianic Jew. So does a lot of debates about Jesus being the Messiah, or about homosexuality, or about the gifts of the Spirit. So those are some of his main topics. And he has the Fire School of Ministry and the On the Line of Fire radio show. So he was one of the speakers, and he really just gave a word of encouragement about continuing the fight. What was going on at this time at the conference was a lot of uncertainty about Bill AB 2943 in California. It's Assembly Bill 2943. It was a bill written by Evan Lowe, it was a gay identified representative there in California, and the bill would expand the fraud and what is the word I'm looking for? Consumer consumer rights laws to include any sort of counseling for not just counseling, but resources, curriculum, speaking engagements, anything where there's an exchange of funds to help people with unwanted same-sex attraction, that would reject a gay affirmative approach, that would promote a biblical view of gender and sexuality. So this was we've had bills such as California at first that banned therapy for adolescents. But this would have been even more far-reaching. It wouldn't just ban therapy, it would have banned books, it would have, and who knows which books, because even if some people are making the case, it could have banned the Bible potentially, because of how the Bible can be used to help resist homosexuality and promote change. But conferences, curriculum, seminars would have banned anything if there was an exchange of funds. And it's like, oh well, no, you can still do this stuff, just don't take money for it. Yeah, like people can afford to do that. Ridiculous. So, I mean, this bill, it was introduced in the spring, I think, of 2018, and it was getting closer and closer to the time for it to be voted on. It already had passed a couple rounds of votes and committees, and Governor Brown was looking for sure he was going to sign it. So all these ministries, we have a lot of ministries and therapists that do this work in California. So this would have really put them in danger. Of course, it would have been challenged, and God willing, would have gone to the Supreme Court. And so at this point, at the conference, it was really uncertain what was going to happen. And some of the people who were at the conference were saying, we kind of hope we're getting ready for it to pass, and we're kind of hoping it will, so that we can actually challenge it and bring this stuff into greater awareness in the public. So Dr. Michael Brown was there. He just gave a word of encouragement. It's like, guys, just keep fighting this fight. And the LGBTQ, I don't like to call them activists because they're beyond, at this point, they're beyond being activists. They're not fighting for rights. They're fighting to take away rights of others. So they're at this point now the LGBTQ fascist. That's why I refer to them. And he's like, the left is going to go too far by eventually, through pretty much the transgender issue, is probably where they're going to overstep, and that will help be their downfall. Maybe the pendulum will swing back a little bit, and it's their own overreach that will be their downfall. So that was his word of encouragement. Just keep persevering. It's either going to get worse and Jesus will return, or it'll get worse and then things will come back a little bit to some sense of normality. And I've been seeing it as well online. I've been seeing a growing backlash against the particularly the transgender issue. People are starting to realize, okay, we're going a little bit too far. But when it comes to homosexuality, I still believe there's people are growing in an awareness that, okay, this may not be something normal. But the left has done such an effective job at their propaganda and painting ministries and counselors who help people with this issue in such a bad light that even people who are conservative, who disagree with homosexuality, will keep their distance from people who do this work because they've bought the myths about the work we do. So there's still a lot of work for us to do. And what I can tell you is these ministries, they are competent. They don't do pray the gay away. They don't just say, oh, you just got to pray for the person. You just got to pray harder. You got to have more faith. No. In fact, first session, Gary Ingram, one of the, I'm not sure if he's currently on the board, but he was, he's probably still is, on the board of directors at RHN. he did one of our opening addresses, and he brought up this sheet that a ministry in Oregon, Portland Fellowship, created. And let me pull that up because this is a very useful sheet. Portland Fellowship had created this sheet that really shows the differing views on homosexuality within the church. So you have on the left, you have the LGBTQ plus Christians, and there's two columns for them. You have what they termed Revel, which would be the gay Christian, but like gay affirming and encouraging in homosexual relationships and behavior and identity. And then to the right of that is Resist, which would be the gay identified, but with the understanding that Scripture is opposed to homosexual behavior. So the main point there is I'm choosing to be obedient with my unchangeable affliction. So I believe it's a cross they have to bear, and that it cannot change. But they still encourage things like a gay identity and terms like sexual minority, and very much they believe there's something special about having a gay identity, even they may not be able to act on their attractions. So it's and also like a month after the Restored Hope Network conference was the Revoice conference. So that was also a big talk going on because that Revoice conference featured everyone that's in this column. And they're tightly tied to that far left column because there's some crossover. Even though they'll be staunch and say no, we do believe that homosexual behavior is a sin, they don't see in their own a gay identity. And in some ways, even some of the workshops at that Revoice conference were about how can homosexual identity contribute to the church? What are the treasures within the LGBTQ community? Like, there's a little too much affirmation of a gay identity and attraction. All right. To the right is a more conservative side, and you have Renounce, which is about I surrender my false identity and sinful behavior. So this you'll see a lot in the Calvinist movement, and just that they believe in repentance, but not a whole lot on the idea of change being possible. So it's more about let's repent of the behavior and find our identity in Christ and not in our homosexual attractions. Whereas Restored Hope Network falls into that far right column of rebuild, which is my hope is in Christ for a truly transformed life. So this is where we understand people may still struggle with same-sex attraction the rest of their lives. That's always a possibility. But we also believe that there's hope and healing through Jesus, his church, counseling, and discipleship programs. So it's like, yes, we'll agree with the renounce column, but at the same time, openness and even promotion of the exploration of the root issues that may have developed. So it's coming from a developmental point of view. So when it comes to same-sex attraction and homosexual behavior, if you see in the origin section, that is both a sin nature issue and a developmental issue. So yes, through Christ we have the answer to the sin nature issue, at least when it comes to the consequences of our sin, at least the eternal consequences. But if you also believe it's a developmental issue, then through Christ and through just sound counseling techniques and through just the healing that comes through what Christ did and the healing of his community and the church, then maybe we can find healing from the developmental issues and as a byproduct experience healing and change in the attractions. With the understanding that, hey, you may struggle the rest of your life. That does not change anything about the value in resisting and pursuing God. So your traditional ministries that used to be part of Exodus fall in that column, and the ministries that are in Restored Hope Network fall under that column. And if you look at the far left and far right, they are the most consistent, ideologically and philosophically consistent points of view. So this sheet that they hand out was just so useful, and I'm probably going to do a separate video on another aspect of how this really helped me out with understanding something. So anyway, this may be a bit scattered, I'm sorry, but just so many treasures I got out of this conference this year. And here we are, like I said, coming back full circle. At the end of the conference on Saturday, they always give the opportunity for people to share their testimony. Now, normally this is reserved just for people who are strugglers. They have same-sex attraction and they want to share about how the conference that they were just at this weekend, how it ministered to them. And so I was hesitant, but at the same time, I'm like, you know what? When am I going to have the opportunity? I don't know if I'm going to be at another conference, and I want to take the opportunity to share a bit of an update because I did speak to a lot of people when I was there at the conference 2015, and maybe some of them are wondering, hey, I wonder what happened to that guy who was being discriminated against at his school. And so I wanted to give an update for those who might have known, but also I wanted to take an opportunity to just thank the whole Restored Hope Network and the ministers and the counselors and my heroes in this field. So I took the opportunity and I shared my story there at the end. And I just, what a way to go back to the beginning and give God praise for what He's been doing as a result of everything. When I was in graduate school and they tried to discourage me from going into this field through a ministry like Restored Hope Network, I was able to, they actually propelled me more into this field. So the joke's on them in the end. So I just have the opportunity there just to say thank you to all those ministers, all those counselors, those ministries. They're my heroes. And I would say for you, if you have heard about things like ex-gay ministries or Exodus International closing and how terrible it was and it must have closed down because it was doing terrible things. Or if you heard about this new movie that just came out, Boy Erased, and because it talks about an actual ministry that used to be part of Exodus, Love in Action. I think it was part of Exodus. And, though that must be what really happens, that they beat people with Bibles. Totally fictional, what that aspect. Do some research. Real research. Go to the ministries websites for these ministries that are part of Restored Hope Network. Look up the blogs of people like Joe Dallas and Ann Paulk and Andrew Comiskey. Read their books. See if, okay, what are they doing? Is it psychologically sound? Is it therapeutically sound? Yes, it is. The ones in this field who are like actual therapists, you got a lot of people that are pastoral care ministers, lay ministers. I'm not even going to disparage them. They still do really good work. But you got a lot of other licensed therapists, mental health practitioners that are in this field. And I'll talk about that more when I talk about the Alliance in another video. But they do excellent work. So go to the source. Don't believe the propaganda that's out there. At least don't make your conclusions off that before doing some legit research. Go on Restored Hope Network's website. Go on their Facebook page. Check out what they actually believe, what they actually do. Don't take the left-wing media, their viewpoint of it. And if you're a conservative and you're against the LGBTQ movement or the activism, but yet you fail to actually support ministries that are on the ground and therapists like myself and others who we're far and few between. Like, be consistent. If you're going to, don't just be against homosexuality. Don't just be against gay marriage. Don't just be against the transgender movement. Like, be for something. Be for actual help for people. So do some research. There are really good counselors and ministers out there that need support. not just moral support, financial support as well. The myth out there in the field is that there's tons of these therapists out there and they're aggressively seeking out clients and they're snatching kids and forcing them to go into these therapy camps and programs. I don't know a single therapy camp, uh, reparative therapy camp, conversion therapy camp. Those are myths, a bunch of lies. So we're few and far between. Most therapists I know don't even want to touch this issue. So find the few that are brave that are out there and show some actual support to them. Don't just be against homosexuality. That's not what the world needs. They need actual help and hope. So that's what ministries like Restored Hope Network are out there doing. They're on the front line, and they're not speaking messages of hate. They're offering God's love and transformation and hope. Um, that's what people need. So I guess that's the end for this video. If you have thoughts, if you have questions, please dialogue with me in the comment section. Share this video as well. All right. Take care. God bless.